Hi, everyone. My name is Courteney Keatinge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are going to be discussing Glass Lewis's new ESG profile. It's a new product that we are really, really excited about. And thank you in advance for logging in and spending some time with us today so we can go through this. So I am joined today by two esteemed panelists who are going to help us walk through the ESG profile, as well as kind of what the implications are for proxy voting, for engagement, and for the other activities that our investor clients undergo on a more routine basis these days. So as I said, I'm Courteney Keatinge. I am the Senior Director of ESG Research here at Glass Lewis. I've been with the firm since 2011, and my team oversees vote recommendations and research on shareholder resolutions, as well as other ESG initiatives on a global basis. And I am joined by, like I said, two of my colleagues, and I will let them introduce themselves. Lucas, let's start with you.
Great, thanks, Courtney, and hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Lucas Swartloff. I am the Director of Client Policy and Stewardship over here at Glass Lewis. I've been with the firm since 2013, and my team helps with all client policy and custom policy implementations on our Viewpoint voting platform. And we are now a global department in New York, with offices in New York, Kansas City, San Francisco, Limerick, Ireland, and Tokyo. And I'll kick it over to you, Jonathan.
Hey, my name's Jonathan Hanson-Granger. I'm the director of the product team here at Glass Lewis. So I joined in 2009, an eternity ago. And yeah, I'm helping lead the team that works on all new product development and new features and functionality and all that stuff. So thanks for having me, Courtney.
Thanks for joining us. And John has many years experience in the research department as well, so I'm sure he will obviously add that expertise as well as we are talking about our ESG product offerings. So we can move on to the next slide, where we'll just go through kind of the agenda, as well as some brief housekeeping kind of points. Essentially, you guys should be receiving a copy of the slides, as well as the presentation that you're watching right now in your email. So if you're just looking for the slides, those should be there. And we're going to go through a lot of different things today, but if by some chance your question was not addressed, we've got an email address. It's just info@GlassLewis that you are welcome to reach out to. And we will be happy to answer any questions you guys might have. And in addition, we also have another website that we've included on this link that you are welcome to go to if you'd like to see some other webinars that we've produced. We do a lot of different things, so we've got a lot of different content, especially in light of the upcoming proxy seasons in many, many markets. So we've got some proxy season previews, reviews, and all sorts of other fun stuff up on our website. So as far as today is concerned, I'm going to go through very briefly about what Glass Lewis is and what we do. And then we're going to really kind of dig into the content of the webinar today. I'm going to give an overview of the ESG profile page, and then talk a bit about how we're collecting this data, as well as how we're scoring this data, what our scoring methodology is. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lucas to talk a bit about custom policy implementation and how this data works as far as custom policy implementation is concerned. And then we're going to go back to Jonathan, where he will discuss kind of some more of our offerings and how the ESG profile fits in with that whole picture. So we can go to the next slide quickly. So just for those of you who do not know Glass Lewis, we are a proxy advisor. We have offices in several different locations, many of which Lucas kind of listed off earlier. We are a global proxy firm. We cover over 30,000 meetings a year, just a lot of meetings. And those meetings are in approximately 100 global markets. We've got all sorts of language expertise and all sorts of kind of regional and jurisdictional kind of expertise as well. So our clients have over 40 trillion in assets under management, and we've been around for over 15 years now, I believe. So yeah, that's Glass Lewis. We've got our website up there if you have any questions, and we do many corporate engagements, and there's a website on there if you are interested in having a meeting with us as an issuer or a shareholder proponent. So with that, we will get into the heart of the conversation today, which is really about the ESG profile page. We've got it up here kind of on one side of your screen, which is just kind of a representative sample of what you can expect to see in over 1,900 global company meetings this year. We will be covering essentially a slightly expanded version of the MSCI world, and we'll also make sure to be covering Climate Action 100 plus companies. There's kind of a special categorization for those companies, so those will be in there as well. So for almost every company, you will see what you are seeing here, with one small exception. And that is with respect to the climate risk mitigation section. And like I said, we've got kind of a special designation for Climate Action 100 plus focus list companies today. So that's roughly 167 of, kind of the biggest companies that investors have identified as systemic emitters. And for those companies, we will be adding, like I said, the climate risk mitigation section that will take a deeper dive into how these companies are performing, what kind of policies they have and what kind of disclosures they have around their climate impacts. For the rest of the companies, we'll be displaying essentially the rest of the features on this page. So every company will receive a kind of overall score, and then there will be kind of 3 subscores or 4 subscores if it's a Climate Action 100 plus company. We're really focused on different areas of ESG. With respect to board accountability, we're really concerned about kind of the governance, shareholder rights, how easy it is for shareholders to influence a company or kind of impact the board. So looking at things like, does the company have inequitable voting rights or multi-class share structure where, it's really impossible to pass anything? Are you able to vote on directors on an annual basis, which we view as an important aspect of board accountability, and even getting into kind of what previous year vote results look like, as sometimes lower vote results can really indicate significant shareholder concern regarding a specific area of a company's governance or disclosures or performance. We also have a section that we're labeling ESG transparency. This is really about what kind of disclosures companies put out. So, kind of really getting into, do they provide things like sustainability reporting, climate reporting, and how well is that reporting kind of aligned to best practices? Things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, CDP, SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, kind of various aspects of companies' disclosure and how well that stacks up against its peers. Then we've got a section on ESG targets and alignment, and essentially these are kind of a company's ESG policies. So what kind of actual steps have they taken to limit their environmental impact or to ensure human rights, either within their organization or throughout their supply chain? So kind of looking at those aspects of a company's ESG policies. Then, like I said, for companies in the Climate Action 100 plus focus list kind of section, we've got a climate risk mitigation module, which essentially is looking at, how well a company is aligning its reporting to TCFD kind of recommendations, as well as, kind of deeper considerations concerning the board's role in overseeing climate-related issues, and kind of what other parties are saying about things like their carbon performance assessment and those types of things. So we are looking to the Transition Pathway Initiative, or TPI, for several of these, as well as companies' own, obviously, disclosures, which are really kind of the heart of what we're looking at. Just to get a little more specific, we can turn to the next slide where we will get into all of the various data points that are available now as a result of the ESG profile page. There are a number of data points that we've been collecting for several years, largely actually as a result of our the introduction of our thematic climate policy, which I know Lucas will touch on in a little bit. However, this is the first time we're displaying them. So a lot of these data points are kind of available in a variety of different forms, again, which Lucas will kind of get into when he talks about custom policy implementation. But there's kind of a variety of different things that investors are wanting to do with these data points, whether it be, informing how they're engaging with companies, informing how they're going to vote on issues like shareholder proposals or election of directors, which is definitely kind of what we're seeing as the newest trend, which is really around director accountability. Or, whether this is kind of helping them to prioritize, which companies to look at more or which companies to kind of give a pass to or something along those lines. So there's lots of kind of variety in what we're collecting. And obviously, we are looking to expand this. So if there are data points that, specifically as an investor, you're really, really interested in obtaining, definitely feel free to reach out. This is kind of a work in progress and an iterative journey. So we definitely welcome feedback on that account. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how we're collecting this data, because I think it's really, really important to just kind of lay out there. This is all information that is collected in-house by ESG data analysts that sit on my team. So essentially, these are research analysts who spend most of their days just kind of searching through corporate filings, as well as kind of other ESG-related websites. So they've definitely had a lot of training, had a lot of exposure to these things. And these are the individuals who will be collecting this data for the 2022 proxy season. In addition, what's really, really important is when we're collecting this information. So we're collecting this information inside the solicitation period, which we define as the time that a company releases its proxy statement or notice of meeting until the company's annual meeting. Obviously, we'll be collecting it closer to the, when the proxy statement is released than when the annual meeting is. But it is important to note kind of that short time frame in which we'll be collecting this information. As ESG becomes more and more important to companies and to investors and to stakeholders, companies are kind of putting more ESG related information on their ballots, and they're also producing this information in a way that investors are using for their voting decisions. However, what we're finding with a lot of ESG data providers is that they're not kind of living and breathing around the annual meeting cycle like we generally are, understandably. But we want to make sure that if we're going to say, you can use this data point in a client's custom policy, that it's as up to date as possible. We are seeing companies put more and more agenda items on the ballot that have to do with ESG related issues, and thus putting out kind of more and more accurate reporting, but it's closer and closer to the annual meeting. There was one large Australian financial institution that did not release its climate report until something like 19 days prior to the annual meeting. That's something that generally will not get picked up by data providers, kind of understandably. So we encourage the disclosure of this information as kind of far out from the annual meeting as possible. We definitely understand the kind of pressure that companies are under, as well as their desire to get out the most accurate information as soon as possible, to the meeting. So there's kind of some conflicting issues going on there, and we're trying to get that real sweet spot when the company's information has been disclosed, right in advance of the annual meeting. In addition, we're also ensuring that this data is available for review by the companies that we're collecting it for. So we're doing that by collecting most of this information and putting it in what we're calling an issuer data report, or an IDR. And what an IDR is essentially a data-only version of our report that we provide to issuers, about 3 weeks prior to their annual meeting. They then have the opportunity to review, make sure everything looks right to them, make any changes, that they might suggest, and then we'll take that back and make any changes, if we made a mistake, if we missed something, or, didn't see something the right way, we'll then make those changes. So all the data will be getting kind of an additional layer of review from companies who choose to participate in the IDR. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that these are what we view as very transparent data points. They are finite. They don't require a lot of kind of interpretation to assess. So we're really trying to kind of provide a usable, actionable data point that is not subject to kind of one analyst interpretation of how something might look. There's a lot of kind of criteria that goes around that. And we want to make sure that our clients are able to understand kind of what's in there as well. We are also sourcing all of this information from publicly available sources. So none of this is kind of back end data that we're kind of collecting that other people are not aware of. This is all information that, we're expecting companies to be putting out in the public domain and are collecting information from those sources. So we can go to the next slide where we'll just kind of briefly go over our scoring methodology. I would say that, scores are probably not the most important part of this, profile page, but they are definitely an important part. What we are presenting is kind of what we view as a fairly simple scoring methodology. We're essentially looking at an absolute score. So this is not impacted by companies in, the same company's industry or geography. These are scores that are kind of unique to a company in this point in time. And can really be used to compare companies, kind of on an apples to apples basis. We are not currently factoring in, really industry specific metrics or indicators. Really what we're trying to look at are the data points that we believe kind of represent the most holistic view of a company's ESG practices. We also wanted to ensure that the data points were kind of consistent from company to company so that, when people are voting or, looking through their portfolios, they're able to identify the issues that are most important to them and have a comparable basis for those issues. So this is an absolute score. And essentially it's based on what we're kind of calling points awarded versus points available. And why we are kind of laying those two things out is because we wanted to make sure it was clear that in certain instances, we will effectively wipe out, what an impact of a certain data point might be on a company's score. Now that sounds a little confusing, so let me step back and explain what I mean. In some instances, companies, for example, in certain areas, the regulators or the markets may dictate that having a classified board is market best practice. It may be a regulation, it may be, something along those lines. In those instances, even though we believe that kind of the annual director elections are the most kind of fitting mechanism for holding boards accountable and for expressing shareholder concern about various items. We don't want to necessarily penalize a company for, doing what they think is best practice or doing what the market is dictating is best practice. So in those instances, we may just kind of, exclude the results of that and take away from both the points. Well, we wouldn't take away from points awarded, we wouldn't add additional points in, but we also would not add additional points to the points available. So while it does slightly impact a score, it doesn't to the extent that it could. And it was the best kind of possible way for us to kind of zero out issues that, may not be applicable in certain markets or to certain companies. So you can always look at our methodology document in order to figure out kind of which ones may be zeroed out for certain markets or in certain instances if you're looking at a specific data point. In addition, I wanted to make sure that that everyone knew the ESG scores, while they are something that our analysts will be looking at, are not necessarily indicative of our voting recommendations or how our benchmark policy will be executed. There's a great deal of overlap kind of between the ESG profile page and Glass Lewis's kind of benchmark recommendations and our views on E&S related issues. For example, there's a very strong focus on things like, gender diversity, on things like ensuring appropriate oversight of environmental and social issues. And when those are not present, it will negatively impact a score as well as our vote recommendations. So there is some overlap there, but there's definitely no kind of direct correlation between the two. And then finally, we really wanted to make sure that these were really transparent data points, and that people had insight into how we're scoring them and what's important to us when we're looking at this ESG score. I have provided a link to our ESG profile methodology in this slide that you are welcome to look at. That is a publicly available document that really should kind of explain each of the data points, where we're sourcing the information from, and how it kind of impacts the score, whether it kind of adds to a score or removes from a score. So to the best of our ability, we kind of put that information out there. And the other thing we wanted to highlight was that all of the factors that are considered in a company score will be displayed on that ESG profile page. So there's no kind of X factor, mystery, data point that's being filled in. This is all kind of contained in the score so that people can kind of make their own minds up really about, how well is this company performing, or, how well does this company stack up to another company? Because it can be kind of tricky when you're looking at a lot of things that you may not be able to see or you may not understand. So that's kind of the overview of the ESG profile page. Again, I would really encourage you guys to visit our website and look over the methodology document if you have very specific questions. But obviously, if we did not answer any of the questions that you guys might have, we are happy to attempt to do so if you email us at the email address that I brought up at the beginning of our presentation today. So with that, now you guys know how we're coming up with all this data and what it looks like. But what's important now is how do you use it? So I think with that, I will turn it over to Lucas, who will talk a bit about the use of these data points in custom policy and how clients can kind of make the best use of them.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. This is, we've seen a massive explosion over the past, 2 to 3 years around custom policy implementation and integration around the data points that you just discussed. And, my team in particular, we've seen that, and it's directly impacted us by our team growing almost triple in size, literally over the past 2 years. And, one thing that we definitely try to take into consideration is, it's not just, taking the data and specifically coming up with a recommendation, but it's really understanding, how this data is going to be utilized for, different initiatives, and also what they want to utilize that data for within their overall proxy voting solution. So my team in particular, what we do is, we like partnering up with clients and better understanding their needs. And usually this process takes anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, depending on how complex, the solutions they're looking for, but also even better understanding, what's the best way for, them to even take this data and implement it within their kind of day-to-day processes. So if you can kick it off to the next slide, then, the way we again work with our clients is we give them an understanding of how our own internal teams apply a lot of our different data points. And again, we do this globally, so across all markets. And then once we get a good understanding there, we also provide offerings that are layered on top of our house policy. So we call these our Glass Lewis thematic policies. So we have an ESG, climate, Taft-Hartley, which is kind of labor union based. We have a Catholic policy, and we have a public pension policy as well, which all of those kind of have their own unique lenses, which kind of guide and drive different types of recommendations. And then on top of those thematic offerings, some people don't just like to take these kind of tailored solutions, and they like to customize it even more, which is then where my team comes into play. And then where even now this new ESG profile page is really exciting, because now clients can really kind of pick and choose what their most important issues are, and really start targeting not only the companies, but even the types of boards that they they definitely want to kind of impact and where they feel they'll have the most impact on. So if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then here's kind of just our kind of predefined policies, our thematic offerings. And with each one of these, I think it's, again, important to understand that, all of these can also be customized. So, our current ESG policy, we have a guideline around, no women on the board for, large cap company. And then for small cap companies, we look to have a minimum of 2 women on the board. Again, it's slightly different than the Glass Lewis house policy, but it's kind of layered on top so that, it takes a more stringent approach. And then even with our climate policy, which, Courteney did a tremendous job of just developing. It's really almost breaking out into almost 3 different policy and really kind of follows the pillars around TCFD. So I think, when you take a look at those, some clients might not want every single piece and they really want to focus maybe one of those pillars. And then you can work with our custom policy team to really identify those and then target those specifically. And with all of that around the custom policy piece, you could even take that and start utilizing our voting platform, which is Viewpoint. And with that, you could, instead of necessarily just driving recommendations, you can actually, create filters and alerts, depending on, how your team is set up so that you can identify, potential issues, within a 2 to 3 week span, because everyone knows how crazy proxy season gets. And it's really hard when you're kind of filtering through your workflow and trying to get through hundreds and hundreds of meetings a week, when it's like, hey, I need to highlight these specific issues around climate change or greenhouse gas emissions, and I want to know what upcoming meetings have these shareholder proposals. So this is where we can kind of utilize that custom policy and then take those specific data points, not only to help you drive a recommendation, but also filter in your workflow to highlight those and set that at a higher priority so you can get to work on that, especially in a kind of high pressure and intense season. And then I guess with that, I know we have a ton of other offerings, and I will kick it over to Jonathan to discuss those.
Cool. Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, I think I'm going to step it just a little bit higher level than kind of the things that Courteney and Lucas have been talking about. So I just wanted to show there's a lot going on this slide. I recognize that, but I think it's important to kind of highlight the variety of different ways that that we can kind of meet not only ESG related product needs, but I'd imagine if you're someone that's interested in ESG, we also have essentially a suite of products related to active ownership, being more engaged in your ownership and kind of leveraging all the tools that might be out there to ensure that you're engaging with the public companies, or that you're kind of taking into account all the various factors and data that might be out there to kind of drive your engagement. So if you look at, I guess, starting from the top, just going down on the research side, what we're here to talk about today, what I'm going to focus most of the time on, I promise I'm not going to go on a 40-minute tangent about every one of these products. But on this left-hand side, the research products, we're of course here talking mostly about our new Glass Lewis ESG profile. Related to that, we are also planning to launch an ESG data product in somewhere around Q3, Q4 this year in the second half. We're actually looking for feedback from investors as to kind of what shape that should come in. It's obviously leveraging the data that Courteney just gave us in great detail that goes into the ESG profile, but we definitely want to, be able to leverage that data and provide it to you for whatever purposes you might have for it. We also have in the Glass Lewis proxy paper also the Arabesque ESG profile and the Sustainalytics ESG profile. And so mostly what I'm going to talk about today is kind of some differences between those and just showing you what that looks like to highlight the differences. But I also just wanted to touch on over here many of the other products that are probably of interest. Lucas obviously touched on policy, and kind of underneath that, cascading down, would be that breakdown that he had. We've got the thematic policies, just the Glass Lewis house policy, and then a fully custom policy. And obviously under the thematic, there is just the ESG policy, which again is probably a logical next step if ESG is an interesting topic to you. But some of the other things that we currently have the ability to track your engagement with public companies. You can record that in Viewpoint right now, actually, and it's free. A lot of people are not kind of aware of that functionality, but that does exist already in Viewpoint, and we are looking to significantly improve and rework and revamp that and launch it in the second half of this year through a new product that we're calling Engagement Premium, which will really allow you to just tie in and track your own engagements and engagement issues that you've identified for the reasons that you're engaging and how those things are progressing, and bring it all into reporting that's aligned with your proxy voting. So proxy voting and engagement all reported kind of in a single place. There's also a letter writing product that we offer to essentially automate kind of outbound engagement to public companies, basically the companies you're invested in. You can kind of define how that works, whether, every time you're voting against a particular meeting, or whether it's specific issue based. And then lastly, in this kind of new product suite of products that we have, the active ownership suite, we have controversy alerts, which essentially kind of notify clients. If you subscribe to this, you get notified of controversial upcoming meetings that are really identified by the in-house expertise of our research analysts. So they're obviously reading through every meeting that's coming up, and when they notice something that is kind of out of the ordinary and what could be considered controversial, they put together a short write-up about it, what makes it controversial, which particular proposals, how do they relate to ESG themes, and we send that out to our clients, and that can actually be integrated into Viewpoint as well, in that kind of workflow that Lucas touched on. And lastly is active ownership engagement, where you can basically leverage the thousands of engagement meetings that Glass Lewis is doing, and essentially leverage it to kind of build on your own engagement. You can, layer us as a supplemental, or you can essentially leverage Glass Lewis entirely and cite it as your engagement program, and you can get details about how we do that engagement and all that. So as much as I'd like to talk about all these products, and you probably don't want me to, so I'm just going to focus on a few of them. So we'll just kind of jump into the ESG pages that we have. Of course, starting with the ESG profile, the Glass Lewis ESG profile that we spent most of this webinar talking about. But to highlight what makes it different from the other ESG profile pages, what are you using it for, that kind of thing. Obviously, go back to the beginning and listen to all the great content Courtney had. But my quick summary is just that this data it's really collected for the purpose of proxy voting and immediately prior to the shareholder meeting, which again, there are no other data vendors that are doing that. They're looking for most recently available filings at a certain point in time. But it's unlikely that it will be immediately prior to the shareholder meeting, because nobody else except us, proxy advisory services, would have that level of pressure to get the data and get it in the report just before the shareholder meeting. This data is also available for use in custom policy, as Lucas talked about, and this is also the only page that actually has that capability. So while there's really great value in data in the other data providers that I'm going to jump into next, we currently don't have any of that data available in custom policy. If there are those data points that you're interested in seeing custom policy, we'd love to hear about it. But right now, it's a much easier bridge to gap to kind of use our own underlying data that we're collecting. And then the other key point is this: we believe it to be a very transparent and clear methodology and kind of documentation. It's almost self-documented in the sense that every data point that we're using in here is literally visible, and kind of the scoring, even with each subsection, is immediately visible as well. So it's not kind of, there's no smoke and mirrors or uncertainty or kind of secret sauce, if you will. So to jump into the other ESG offerings and kind of value that we have in products. So the Sustainalytics ESG profile page has a really well built out kind of risk-based assessment of ESG. It's a globally comparable, which is great. This is actually, they used to have a different scoring methodology. They switched to risk rating, I guess 2 years ago now, year and a half or two. And one of the big shifts there is that now this rating is actually comparable across the world, any company across any industry, which is great. It's, as I mentioned, risk-based assessment, which compares a company's kind of risk exposure. What is the potential? Are they oil and gas with, or nuclear with a huge, potential for some pretty, negative outcomes there, and then compare that to their risk mitigation, essentially their risk management. What have they put in place to ensure that those things don't happen or that they're prepared if they do? And basically it's looking at the deviation between those two. High risk with no risk management, you're not going to get a very good score, probably be up in the severe. Whereas if you have low risk and you're doing well at managing it, then it's negligible risk. So they have some other, really valuable information here that we have in this profile page. Material issues kind of grouped by section, so you can see, whether they're material issues related to business ethics or human rights and that kind of thing. It's kind of grouped by category. And then on the second page of this Sustainalytics ESG profile, we have noteworthy controversies, which is also really interesting. It's essentially bringing in kind of like newsworthy events from those types of sources to highlight some, again, based on kind of a categorization of, is it severe or is it a high or is it a significant level of kind of controversy, to, again, bring that data in and just highlight at a glance, are there some bad things going on with this company? And then lastly on here is the product involvement space, which shows you not only which products might a public company be involved in, and again, focusing on kind of controversial products, gambling, alcohol, et cetera, but also the range, the percentage of their, I believe it's revenue that actually comes from that particular business. So that's Sustainalytics. And then lastly, we have our Arabesque ESG profile page, which we just launched toward the end of last year. And so they have really a big data and algorithmic approach with a proprietary ESG rating methodology, leveraging thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of sources and over 250 ESG data metrics. So pulling in from different news signals, and it's essentially a live rating at all times based on basically the most recently available information coming from, again, a litany of different sources. We also have in here a section for business involvements that will highlight, similar to the controversial products on the Sustainalytics page, but basically any specific business involvement that might be noteworthy from an ESG perspective. And lastly on here, we see a trend of historical ESG score and also their other kind of rating, the GC score. So you can actually see kind of the trend over time, which is something that we frequently hear from clients. They're interested in where things are right now, but perhaps most importantly, they're interested in how is this company performing over time? Are things getting better or are things getting worse? So that's it in terms of the products that I wanted to highlight. I could keep talking all day, but you probably don't want that. So I'll hand it back over to Courtney.
John, of course I want that. He always brings such valuable information, and I'm not even joking. He's a big lifesaver. So anyway, we can probably go to the next slide. Just where there's some contact information. If anybody has any questions, we really appreciate everybody tuning in today to listen to us talk about this project that we're all, I know, very excited about. And please feel free to reach out. Like I said earlier, if your question wasn't answered, or if you have any feedback for us, we're always happy to listen. So with that, thank you so much, Lucas and Jonathan. We really appreciate your time today and your insights on this issue. And we look forward to speaking, I'm sure, soon about something else exciting that we have coming out. Thanks.